we're going to begin with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this morning, for each person in this study here that has taken the time to open your word and to look at the things in the book of Ezekiel that are so profound and that your Holy Spirit has inspired. We ask for your Spirit to teach us and guide us and help us to understand these things. We pray for the needs of many. We pray for a sister who asked for prayer for her husband. We just ask that you can watch over them. And a friend of mine who's him and his wife both had broken an ankle, and we just ask that you can help them to heal. And we ask, Lord, that the things that we study will change our characters, give us a deeper conviction, and prepare us for the work that is ahead of us. Thank you for hearing our prayers. Be with us now as we study thy word. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to Stephen. And it's also nice to see many people are still watching these videos online. And I know some people are behind because the older videos keep getting more views, and the newer videos are a little bit behind on that, but I know people are catching up. So in the study of Ezekiel, we are presently, we've been going over Ezekiel 42, 43, and understanding the altar. There's a bunch of different things that I've been studying to try to get more background information. And we dealt with the Shekinah glory moving into the holy place. And we dealt quite a bit of time understanding yesterday the connection between Ezekiel and the visions themselves. So to me, that was a very profound insight that was focused upon the idea that he says in verse 3 of chapter 43. And it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city. And I hadn't really thought of Ezekiel coming to destroy the city. I just thought he was watching what was happening. But in the way that it plays out, well, that's not, I shared my desktop, not the, let's go here. He's not just observing something, he's actually a part of what's happening. And to try to connect this to this movement at the present time, the way that I understand it, the way I've tried to explain it, is that as prophecy is unfolding, it's unfolding as a result of us participating in the understanding of a message and the giving of a message. And that without that understanding of the message and the giving of the message, that is, if you don't have an increase of light and then a formalization of the message, and the formalization is in the proclamation of that message, then you're not going to have an empowerment of that message. You're not going to have, and the empowerment of that message are events that unfold. So this whole unfolding of end time prophecy is the result of people who have recognized the prophetic waymarks, studied God's word, participated in that, and then become an example or a sign of what's going to happen. Now, I was thinking about this and trying to put it in a package that we can understand, or at least how I understand it, trying to explain it the best way that I can. So I'm going to ask some questions. Who is Samuel Snow in the context of the three angels' messages? Anybody can answer. Who is he? What is his role?
Well, he gives a midnight cry.
Okay, so he gives the midnight cry. Now, what is the midnight cry in the context of the three angels' messages?
It is the empowerment.
Okay, it's the empowerment. It's the second angel's message, right? So Aran wrote that there. So Samuel Snow has a part in the second angel's message. Now we know that Miller proclaimed the first angel's message. Now, if we are going to look at this movement right now, how do we understand this movement? What is the part that this movement is playing in relationship to Millerite history? I know that's kind of a broad question. What is this movement about?
Well, the messenger.
Okay, there's a messenger. So if we go back to Millerite history, you have the first and second angel's message. So who's the messenger of the first angel's message? Miller. And the second angel's message? Snow, right? So you have these two messengers. Now, when we look at our history, who's the first messenger and who's the second messenger?
Jeff would be the first messenger.
Right. And so Jeff, the first messenger is Jeff is the one who fulfills that role. So it is an individual, just as it is in Millerite history. But for the second angel, who's the messenger?
Ezekiel.
Okay, so Ezekiel, right? So who's Ezekiel in our time?
The movement.
It's the movement. Now, and this point has been a problem within this movement because many people were looking for an individual. And why is it that we can't look for an individual under the second angel in our line?
Because of the call out, because of the warning.
Okay, explain that more.
Well, okay, you have a warning message that's going to go out under the fourth angel, and the fourth angel is a repeat of the second angel.
Right.
It's an expansion of the second angel.
Right. It's an expansion of it. Now,
okay. So the point is that one person cannot be giving this type of a message. It has to be a group of parties that have been convicted that this message is to go forward.
Yeah. And I don't know if people remember when Jeff used to draw these lines and he started to understand, it was even before Ezra 7:9, and he would draw out the lines and he would look at Millerite history and he would see that there were some things that were, and they didn't use the word internal or external back then. They used the word, I'm trying to think of the word he used, but one was more worldwide, right, which would be external, and the other one was, I'm trying to think of the word that he used for internal. It wasn't internal, but it was more within the movement, within the Millerite movement itself. So he had a word that sort of meant on a smaller scale, but I can't think of what word it was. So one of the things that he noticed is that this movement was really not recognized on a worldwide scale. The Millerite movement was this huge movement that was recognized. And we had this problem because our movement didn't seem to be recognized. I mean, it was just a small movement, unlike the Millerite movement. So when we say that, we're going to repeat Millerite history to the very letter, there was this problem that always presented itself where there was this reversal of what was happening to our movement compared to Miller's movement. Is that clear? Did anybody have any questions about that or comments about it? Micro?
Not yet.
Macro? I don't know if he used the words micro and macro.
Good, I think he did.
Heidi thinks he did. It could have been.
I think he did.
It could have been.
I just couldn't remember that.
But I remember the worldwide extent of the Millerite movement. I mean, it's something that wasn't just Miller. There was other people around the world involved in that movement. And it was something, of course, that was, you know, in the headlines in the newspapers, what the Millerite movement was doing. So it wasn't just something that was hidden in a corner. But in this movement, to a large degree, until the 2520 came along, nobody even cared about this movement. The 2520 was sort of this, you know, from a marketing point of view, something that could sell the movement. You know, talking about parallels of Millerite history, it's not very catchy, but you have a phrase like 2520, all of a sudden, oh, you know, that's something you have to worry about. So the movement became more noticed after that time, after 2004, 2005. But the problem that we had then is that we have this movement that's not paralleling the Millerite movement as far as the extent of it. And when we look at Snow, when we look at Samuel Snow, and we compare our movement with Snow, what we see is that Samuel Snow, again, he's insignificant, he's unimportant, and he doesn't really become noticed until August 15th, 1844, at the Exeter camp meeting. Even his presentation that he did on July 21st before 5,000 people at the Boston Tabernacle, even though it began a stir, I guess you might say, you know, he's not a major preacher. He's, you know, he's sort of doing stuff on his own in different areas than where Miller is. But because of his article in July 18th, the Midnight Cry, I believe that's the reason he was asked to speak on that Sunday at the Boston Tabernacle. But still, it took time. And the main part that we see that this movement is paralleling, at least up to this point, to July 18th, is we've been studying and understanding something that is going to be given to the Levites, and that's going to be paralleled by July 21st, midnight, and August 15th. That's going to still be future. But we didn't know that within this movement. We didn't know that we were Snow. I mean, we maybe thought about it to some degree that we might be Snow at these future events, Midnight and the Midnight Cry, in the line of the Levites. But we didn't understand the significance of Snow and the development of truth that began, for him, it began even before the end of the year 1843, right? So he had been studying this already, basically back in the fall of 1843. So this movement has this parallel with Snow that hadn't been understood. And I don't think it's still yet understood by the vast majority of the people within the movement. And that's why we had the failure of July 18th, is because we thought we were, in a sense, further along than we were in that line, at least in far as its relationship to the line of the Levites. Now, this doesn't mean that, you know, we're behind, because we're still at the end times. It's just the actual events or waymarks we weren't, you know, understanding fully. So in trying to understand Ezekiel then, as he becomes this sign or this type, we remember that Ezekiel begins on the 5th day of the 4th month, which is an odd place to begin if he's going to be paralleling our movement, because our movement is looking forward to a date that we see as typified by the 5th day of the 4th month. So in understanding Ezekiel, we say that Ezekiel is Snow, but is Ezekiel Snow before midnight or after midnight? I don't know if that's, again, is a good question, but I want you to think about it. Because if he starts on the 5th day of the 4th month, what does that mean about the relationship between Ezekiel and Snow? Or is there some way in which I'm not understanding this? because we dealt with this before when we were trying to draw this on a line. Which here I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna draw this again, and I have to get rid of that. Right, so we have 1798, August 11th, 1840, first day of the first month, fifth day of the fourth month, first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month. Right, so this we call 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law. And we know that Ezekiel, so I'm just going to put Ezekiel here. This is where he begins his prophesying. And this would be Ezekiel 1, verse 1 to 2. And this is Ezekiel 40, verse 1, right? So that's going to be July 21st. And this is October 22nd, right? 592 and 573. And of course, this is July 21st and October 22nd. So you have these two dates lining up, the fifth day of the fourth month and July 21st in this history and saying there. So this is Ezekiel, but we're saying that Samuel Snow, he's going to be here at Boston, and he's going to be here at Exeter. So we know that Ezekiel is typifying this message here, but we also know that Ezekiel points to July 18th, and he does this with the symbol of the 10th, the fifth day of the 10th month. And this is also, of course, July 18th here. This is confirming the covenant. And this is July 18th in Millerite history. And then we've used this July 18th in our line as well. So here I have Ezekiel, but we know that July 18th for us comes before midnight, as it does with Samuel Snow. But in Ezekiel's history, he has this date. He's starting on the fifth day of the fourth month, and he's proclaiming the destruction of Jerusalem. The walls of the city are going to be broken down on July 18th, and then the city itself will be destroyed on the fifth day or 10th day of the fifth month. I did that backwards. So are people understanding what I'm doing, what I'm talking about, asking about Ezekiel? Why is Ezekiel in this history, but Samuel Snow and us are in this history, what we call the prediction before midnight? What is this? Why does Ezekiel, why is he covering this history, but Snow and us are covering this history as in relationship to July 18th? Right, because here you're going to have his July 18th symbolized on two different events, the 10th day of the fifth month. They're not the same date. Does anybody have an answer to this? Is our movement going to be here at midnight in the midnight cry?
Yes.
Okay. So our movement is going to be here. Now, in Millerite history, that was Snow. But there was this work that was going on here in this prediction before midnight that was hidden. But here, is Snow now exalted onto the world stage, let's say?
No. He's exalted within the movement, but not on the world stage.
Okay, so within the movement, right? So even Snow himself is not people don't know who Snow is. When the world is looking at October 22nd, are they aware of Snow, or are they just thinking about Miller?
Miller only.
Yeah, so only Miller. So even here, Snow in this whole history is a hidden character. Now, what about Ezekiel? How would you describe Ezekiel within the context of the Bible, of the Bible prophets? Is Ezekiel the most understood Bible prophet?
Absolutely not.
He's the least understood. And, Isaiah, people know about Isaiah, Jeremiah. We know about Ezekiel, but nobody understands Ezekiel. It's the puzzle of, Daniel would be more well known. Now, Ezekiel, of course, has all this strange stuff in it that usually is picked up by people in mental institutions. And I mentioned that because a friend of mine, I was talking to him last night, and he's going to start watching these studies. But he was mentioning that he was really into the book of Ezekiel, especially the temple and its measurements, when he was in a mental institution. At a time he was staying with me, I actually had to phone the cops on him, and he got arrested in front of my house, dressed in a sheet, stopping traffic and doing strange things. So anyway, when he was in the mental hospital, he said he was really interested in the measurements of the temple in the book of Ezekiel. So I mention all that just because the book of Ezekiel has all of these puzzles, and people might even think that we're a little bit crazy studying Ezekiel in the way that we are doing this. But Ezekiel has his time. That is, the book of Ezekiel has its place. And the reason why Ezekiel was not understood, why was Ezekiel not understood until the present day? Let me put it that way.
It was like the Lord has had his hand over the book of Ezekiel.
Yeah, it's really a hidden book in a lot of ways. Now, we know that the book of Daniel was opened in 1798. And we know that the book of Daniel has a major role, especially Daniel 11:40-45 in the end times. But the book of Ezekiel is a book for who? Who is the book of Ezekiel written for?
For those at the end of time that would give a message, a warning message to the world.
Yeah, and so the book of Ezekiel could not really be understood till the present day. So, we've discovered so many things from the book of Ezekiel, and it's not because, we're more clever than people in the past, but it's because we're now in the period of fulfilled prophecy of which we have been a part. And so this idea, I know I'm kind of taking a roundabout way, but I want you to think about it, is that Ezekiel, he is now serving his role here at midnight in the midnight cry. And he's pointing to this Sunday law. That's the role of Ezekiel. And that will be our role at some point. But we also know that in Samuel Snow's letters, his letters are typifying what's going to happen later. And this movement now has taken upon this role. Now, so the question was about, why is it not an individual? And one is the work is too big. So we could see within Millerite history, it only took an individual to do this work. He studied on his own. He came to these conclusions. He presented it within this movement. So in a sense, he's doing something within the movement. And we are too. We're going to be doing something within the movement here. But we're going to be proclaiming a message to Adventism. And that message is bigger in a sense. It's a bigger work. It would be impossible for one person to take upon that role. Now, there's another reason too. It has to do with the role of the priests and the 144,000 and the role that this movement has in connection with that, which I don't want to go into. But the point is, we made a mistake of thinking that an individual could fulfill that role. Now, Jeff as an individual did fulfill the role that paralleled Miller. But Miller was known, right? Miller became part of this big movement, where with Jeff, his work was still within, to a large degree, a very small group of people. I mean, obviously some people in Adventism knew who he was, but not many people. Definitely the General Conference never knew about him, or the BRI. I mean, he was just not significant. It was mostly within small groups of present truth Adventists that would have even known about him. Now, of course, this July 18th prediction, what did it do in the context of this movement?
It put it on the world stage.
Yeah, it did put it on the world stage. I mean, like newspapers all over the world, newspapers in England and newspapers all over the United States and other parts of the world were writing about this July 18th prediction. And the significance of that, I don't think we have grasped, because many people in the movement are embarrassed about the July 18th prediction. But why should they not be embarrassed about it? Just in what I said.
Well, the world has been made aware of Ellen White's vision
Right.
concerning
the world-
Nashville.
Yeah, so the Nashville vision, for the first time since Ellen White gave it, was now international news. But also, it's put this movement in a place or a position that as events unfold, this movement, and not so much this movement like our movement FFA, because I don't think it's going to exist, but the movement within Adventism that's going to result is going to be placing Adventists in the position that Bible prophecy said that they would be. And it's because of this movement. So when we deal with this Sunday law that's coming, we know that the Sunday law couldn't come unless all this preliminary events unfolded. You can't just have a Sunday law pop out of nowhere. You couldn't have the 2300 days just end without a movement proclaiming their end, because it wouldn't mean anything. Christ can't just move from the holy to the most holy place arbitrarily. Everything that's happening in heaven happens as a result of what's happening on earth. And so this part that we have to play in end time events is typified by what happens with Ezekiel. His connection to these events that he is describing are to help us to understand our connection to the events that are unfolding and the responsibility that's been given to humanity in regard to fulfilled prophecy. That we have, God sets up kings and takes down kings. He orders events. But he does so because he has a message. He always has a prophet proclaiming a message. And so this is not an individual at this time. This is a movement that Ezekiel is typifying. So I don't think I did a very good job of explaining that, what's in my head, because I know it's not, I couldn't get it all out. But maybe we will see it as time goes on. So that was what we learned. And I really wish I could explain it better. Yeah, so Ezekiel's father was named disrespect, despised. That's an interesting comment, because Buzai, which would be his father. And how do you do this? I don't know. Can't look at that one. Okay. Shamed. The controversy over July 18th is a foretaste of persecution when the whole world hates us because they hate Christ. And that's the thing, is why would we be ashamed of the gospel? I mean, that to me is part of the problem with July 18th, is we gave a message that we believe to be true, and yet we're ashamed of it. And why are we ashamed of it?
Those that are ashamed of it are ashamed because it didn't come to pass.
Right. And so what, I mean, I don't want to go into that whole thing, but the point of is we can't, we read that last time in Hebrews chapter 10, right? So I'll just look at it again. Cast not away therefore your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward, for ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. So we have this confidence, which I say is these lines, that everything that God has given us, and if we cast that away, we're not going to receive the promise. And we need this patience. We have to wait for it. And that's why he quotes Habakkuk 2. For yet a little while, and he shall come, will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. And so the Apostle Paul understands the significance of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1 to 4. He understands those points. And we have to understand those points. So let's get into our study of Ezekiel. Now, I want to look at the altar. So these are the measures of the altar after, and I have to make this bigger so you can see it. Here it is. And these are the measures of the altar after the cubits. A cubit is a cubit and a handbreadth. So he's just telling you what he told you in chapter 40. That the reed that's 6 cubits long, each of the cubits are a cubit and a handbreadth, or 21 inches. And now when he's going to talk about the altar here, where's he going to start with? He says, the border thereof by an edge thereof round about shall be a span, and this shall be the higher place of the altar. What is he talking about? Here, we looked at it before, and it seemed that the Hebrew here is a little bit odd in how it expresses this.
No, it's very odd.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
The alternate reading would be, and these are the measures of the altar after the cubits. The cubit is a cubit and a handbreadth. Even the bosom shall be a cubit.
Right.
And the breadth a cubit, and the border thereof by the lip thereof round about shall be a span.
Right. So what this is this is the base of the altar.
Right.
And I do have some pictures here. So you can see here we have this is the altar looking down, and then this is the altar from the side. And so this is the base of the altar at the bottom. Can people see this quite well, or could I make it bigger?
It comes through fine on my computer.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make it a little bit bigger here. We can look at this bottom part. And so we can see here, this is the base. Now, there's also this ledge or this area in which you have like a lip, it calls it in the alternate reading. So these are for catching things. This is kind of like a drainage system, is my understanding of it. So these aren't decorative. You have the brazen altar itself with its various levels or bases. So you have here, H, they call the altar hearth. So that's the part where the fires would be. And then you have an enclosure here below it supporting the higher ledge. So this ledge here is like a drainage system. So I'm not sure how that works. And then you have this interior supporting ledge, and then the base. And these steps, I want to address those because I've read a bit more about them. And you can see in the one diagram that we had, that 3D representation, it just had the steps come up to the top of the enclosure supporting the higher ledge, but which made no sense because you have, it was 84 inches, I believe. So 7 feet or whatever it was, 7.5 feet, 7 feet. And here this guy puts it in feet, which is nice. He has 7 feet, 7 feet, 3.5 feet. and 1.75 feet. So he has all these measurements in feet. And looking at this from above, you can see that this is 12 cubits square, but it's also 21 by 21 feet, which, Stephen, what's the significance of that?
Well,
12 cubits are 21
Yeah.
feet.
21 times 21 is 441, which is a myrrh
Yeah,
of 144.
yeah.
441.
Yeah. So, and Stephen did a little post on WhatsApp group dealing just with Genesis 1:1, showing this numerical structure dealing with the numbers of the Hebrew words, the gematria, I guess that would be, and their structure. And it's very, very interesting. But we can also see that 21 is a reverse of 12, right? So it's a mirror.
Okay.
So this shows up again and again, this 21. One is there's 21 inches to a cubit. So just that 12 cubits of 21 inches, but also that this is 21 feet, the 12 cubits. Now, of course, that's because 12 inches are what makes up a foot. So, I mean, it's just the relationship that naturally exists between these. So, but it's very, very interesting that we have these numbers 12 and 21.
Well, let's also look at this, in the way that you've done it in the past,
Okay.
with the measurement going up these steps.
Okay.
Your height becomes 231 inches.
Right.
Now, I find it, I'm intrigued because the alternate reading for verse 15 is, so the altar shall be 4 cubits, and from the altar and upward shall be 4 horns. That's the standard reading, right?
Yeah.
The alternate would be, so Harel, that is the mountain of God, shall be 4 cubits, and from Ariel, that is the lion of God, and upward shall be 4 horns. So,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, it is.
What's the significance of that? So Harel, so it calls Harel. Now Ariel, that is actually another name for the city of Jerusalem as well. It's a poetic name for Jerusalem.
Right.
Yeah.
Continue. I mean, the point that I'm looking at is, why would the altar itself be named the mountain of God?
Yeah.
And then the horns be named Ariel? And why did the translators tie this back with Isaiah 19:1?
Okay, so we go back to Isaiah 19. The burden of Egypt, behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud. He shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. I don't know. So that's what they refer to?
Right.
That's
one of the margin readings that's tied directly to Ezekiel 43:15.
Are you sure it's not Isaiah 29? Because Isaiah 29 refers to Ariel.
Okay, that could be. I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
so it says, woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year, let them kill sacrifices. Yet I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel. I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and will raise forts against thee. So here in this context of talking about it as Ariel, notice the reference to the killing of sacrifices.
Right.
Because that's what we're dealing here, is we're dealing with the altar itself. Right? So,
Right.
and this is the altar of sacrifice. So I don't know the significance of that. Yeah, and it says, well, in Isaiah 29:7, and the multitude of all nations shall fight against Ariel, even all that fight against her and her munition, and that distress her, and shall be as a dream of a night vision. Yeah, you just introduced a new puzzle.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
this, where we're starting on this is intriguing, but I'm still stuck more on verse 3, and maybe we'll come back to that here after a little bit.
So verse 3, it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Kibar. So are you focusing upon the words vision in verse 3 more, or just the idea that I was talking about?
I have focused on that as far as the vision in verse 3 and the words that are used for that, but the alternate reading was, and it was according to the appearance of the vision which I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to prophesy that the city should be destroyed.
Yeah, that's the way that they put it in the alternate reading, which isn't the literal reading as far as I can see.
Right.
Now, just dealing here with these words vision, you can see, well, you probably can't see because you can't read Hebrew so much. But you have the 4758.
Right.
And you have it in different forms. Now, when you look at the, so you can see here in Ezekiel 4:3, I'm just clicking on the 4758s. And you can see that it's actually doubled here.
Right.
Mara. So if you go back to the King James, you'll see here, it was according to the appearance of the vision. So both the word appearance and vision are the same word.
It's agreed, but I mean, here's the problem that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
In 43:3, you have the appearance of the vision, which are both 4758.
Yeah.
Then it comes again to the vision, which is again 4758. But when we come down to the plural of visions, it's 4759.
Right, which I wanted to look at as well. So you're going to see that this word Mara shows up multiple times. And
right.
So it's according to the visions, which they translate as the appearance of the vision. But we know that that's not talking about, like it's the same word. And it just here has here at the beginning, it has a vav because Hebrew reads backwards, and then a kaf. And then you have the word Mara. And then here you have a het. So it just means this kaf means like according to, or it relates them together. So the visions, according to the vision's vision, or the vision, if you just were to translate it. And according to the vision, which is, this is just the word Asher, which means lots of different things, which I saw basically. And then you have this, again, it's going to have the kaf in front of it, 4758. And then you're talking about the 4759
right.
that shows up. And I don't see it in the Hebrew. So that it has the feminine form. Now I'm just going to, just for your benefit here, let me see if I can find it. I didn't open this. Oh, here it is. So I use this thing called Scholar's Gateway.
Okay.
And Scholar's Gateway gives me a little bit more detail. I don't think we're going to get very far today. So here you can see I can click on the word and it's going to show me that this one's the masculine singular. It is going to give me the definitions of these words, and you're going to see again the Mara, and again the Mara here, right? And then I'm going to go along here, and you're going to have, now this is the one which is the feminine plural.
Right.
So I'm just going to go back here. So the Strong's number is 4758, 4759, 4760. So they have these different, and what it has is this at the end, instead of a het, it has a vav with a dot above it, which makes it an O sound. And then it has a tav, which is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet pronounced T, right? So mera ot is the Hebrew. And it just has this vav at the beginning, which is just that, it's just that connecting link between a sentence, which we sometimes translate as and we translate various ways. So I know everybody's getting this Hebrew study here. But when you look at this one, this is just my Hebrew. It doesn't use the 4759. It uses the 4758 for that. But it is, if you look at the Hebrew, you can see it has the feminine form. So it has the vav and the tav at the end. So I'm not sure why they put 4758 there. So part of the problem with Strong's is Strong's, he's not a Hebrew scholar. And so he's just looking at these forms of the words and giving them these numbers. But,
Okay.
right. Okay, so your point here, your question or whatever.
No, the point that I was about to make, and
Yeah.
we addressed this just a while back, in the year 2000, especially in 2001,
Yeah.
there was a major update to Strong's. And the situation here with what we're dealing with in eSword, I'm having to wonder if they didn't make the change.
No, the eSword is using the old Strong's.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's not using the updated Strong's. Because one of the reasons they updated the Strong's was to get the copyright.
Okay.
And he doesn't have, he using the uncopyrighted Strong's. Let me see if I can find it. Anyway, I've looked it up before. It's an old Strong's that he's using. He's not using the new Strong's.
Okay.
But here, when I'm using the Hebrew, this Hebrew Old Testament, I'm not sure who put this together. They put the Strong's numbers, but they don't always agree with the Strong's numbers. So I'm not sure why. So I'm not sure where this Hebrew Old Testament, where they get these numbers from. But anyway, and we know that Strong's made a couple of mistakes in Daniel chapter 8 with the word vision, that it actually labels one as, I believe, the Mara when it's actually the Chazon, or the other way around. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not totally familiar with that part. I have watched it when we get later in Daniel 8, the word that's being translated as vision is 4758.
Yeah.
And that's why it intrigued me when I was going through this in Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see that, knowing that Ezekiel was being a very careful writer, and then with your confirmation that Ezekiel was written prior to Daniel 8 and later, that Daniel was likely understanding some of what Ezekiel had been shown.
Mm-hmm.
And then they are both using this same word to give a very specific definition. So here's Ezekiel in this in this particular verse, using the same word for what Gabriel said was the vision that is true, or the 2300 days.
Yeah. Now I have a question. You know,
Sure.
Notice that Ezekiel here, we haven't really talked about this too much, but he's by the river Kibar,
Right.
when he has this vision of the glory of God. And we know Daniel has visions by the river Hiddekel and the river Ulai. And what do you think the significance of these visions being by the river? I mean, this is kind of an aside to what we're talking about here. But
Well, okay, if a river or waters are representative of people,
yeah,
normally when you're talking about a large body of water, you're talking about a large mass of people.
yeah,
But by being by a river, which is not normally a large body,
yeah.
is this not indicative of a vision that is being given to a smaller, let's say, cross section or movement of people?
Yeah, and that's kind of how I look at it. And it symbolizes the message itself, that it's being given to people, but it's a river is then going to flow into a large body of water.
Right.
Right. So this, and this relates back to what we were talking about. So it's not completely an aside, but about this movement and the work that it has. If you look at Ezekiel, his message, the primary start of that message is by the river Kibar. And so this river represents the message itself, is how I see it. These people that are giving this message, this movement, right? Yeah.
So that here's a situation. Here is a message that is given to a small group of people that flow into a larger group of people. So is that not also a symbol of how the message is going to go into the world?
Exactly. And yeah, so I mean, there's still lots of things that that we need to see here, and we might come back to some of these ideas again.
So the other references that were given to this particular verse,
Okay.
were Ezekiel 9:1 and Ezekiel 9:5.
Right. So that would obviously bring us back to the destroying angel message.
Right.
And that's because that's where he's referencing us back to that time.
Correct.
So, because this is what Ezekiel's message is about. It's about the coming destruction of Jerusalem, but it's also about the coming destruction at the end of the world.
Right.
And we can see that because Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. In his first part of his book, he's dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem. And then later he's dealing with the restoration. But now he's going to deal with the destruction at the end of the world of the wicked. Right? So that's what we have already covered. And now he's going to go back to this temple. And the way that I look at this, obviously the temple represents things in the future symbolically, but it also represents this movement. So
right.
this temple is about this movement. This measurement of the temple is about the time prophecies connected with this movement, and the symbols of what this movement is about spiritually. The 144,000, the message that's going to lead to the restoration, and so this movement is typical of that which is antitypical, and so the movement itself has to precede all of these events in Ezekiel that are going to happen in the future, right? Because where this river that's going to flow into this ocean.
Right.
So if you don't have these events happening now, if this movement failed in its role, I mean, it would have to be given to someone else, because God's word it's not going to fail. But if there's nobody giving the movement, you don't have the events in the future happening. If you don't have anybody giving that message, if you don't have a movement giving that message, those future events will not occur.
Right.
And then somebody made a note dealing with Kibar means the extent of time seen that which is now formerly. So this is the Hebrew word 3528 and 3529. I'm just going to look that up. So these Hebrew words, kibar, means already, long ago, a great while. And
Okay, so
and it's the river Kibar is the 3529, but it also relates to 3527, much, many, abundance, to make many, make great. Okay, so what were you going to say there?
could the symbol of the river Kibar be the Millerite message and the Millerite history?
Yeah, well, it would be, especially in connection with Samuel Snow,
But what I'm
the second angel's message.
no, what I'm getting at is Ezekiel standing by Kibar is standing by the message that was given by the Millerites. And then Daniel, as you just pointed out, is standing by two different rivers,
Mm-hmm.
Hiddekel and Uli.
Yeah.
Could that represent the movement as we know it today?
Yeah. Well, here's another way to look at it. We know that these rivers, like Kibar is a river basically on the east or the west part of the Babylonian, more the Assyrian part of things, but which is still the kingdom of Babylon. And then, so it's northern Babylon at that time. And then you have the Hiddekel, which is just the Tigris, just another name for the Tigris, which is again a Babylonian river.
Right.
And then you have the Uli, which is the river in Persia. And so part of it has to do at each of these times is the nation that is connected to that river as well. So it's a message about that nation, right? That's going to bring that destruction or be connected to that history as well. So there's a lot of symbolism in these rivers, but I would think that, the connection to the message, like to Millerite history being the river, because these of course precede Millerite history, but they also follow it depending on the perspective that you're looking at, because Ezekiel is before Millerite history, but he's now standing at the end of the world after Millerite history. So there's that connection of time. A river, the other way to look at it is time is like a river, right? We've heard that expression.
Oh yeah.
And so, so to me, this idea of already long ago, a great while, for the definition of the word kibar as an adverb, not as a noun, to me, it's connecting the past to the present. That's what a river does, if that makes sense.
It has an interesting connotation.
Yeah. So when we deal with the altar here, so I want to get this altar done at least today. We have about a half an hour to do it. So with the altar, we have these various measurements, which we looked at in the 3D representation. But I don't want to so much look at that. I mean, I want to obviously relate to it. But the question is the purpose of this altar. Why is there so much focus upon this altar? And as you saw, we connected it back to the destroying. What did we connect it to? We connected it back to that was Isaiah 29, dealing with the sacrifice of like Ariel, the city where David dwelt, Agi, year to year. So what does it mean, Agi, year to year? How would we describe that expression? What are we doing when we're adding year to year? Have we ever done that? Have we ever added a year to a year?
Doubling?
would that not be measuring time?
Yeah, that would be.
Okay. And also we have the doubling, Ariel, Ariel. So that's a symbol of the midnight cry. And this is about Jerusalem. It's about the destruction that's going to come upon Jerusalem.
So Ariel, Ariel, the Lion of God, the Lion of God. I mean, isn't that also pulling something more from Revelation? The lion that roars.
The Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Right.
Yeah. But when it says add ye year to year, I mean, I know that's probably just an idiom that means, you know, not we're kind of taking it in a more symbolic sense. Like, I mean, all the translations seem just to add year to year. This one's a strange translation. I'm just seeing what the, add ye year to year. Let the feast come round. Let them kill sacrifices. Yet I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel. And I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and I will raise forts against thee. So this is Isaiah, who's writing a long time before the time of Ezekiel, giving basically the same message that Ezekiel is giving. So when we go back to Ezekiel and we look at this altar, and as you have pointed out, this altar is referring to, it's the word Arel or Harel or Ariel.
Yeah, Harel.
Harel. And well, just let me look at this in, so we got altar, that's, now, so that was the alternate reading for which part? I'm just gonna, how we ended up with Arel.
Okay, that the alternate in this one, the alternate reading, the Hebrew alternate, was pointed first to the word for the altar
In verse 15.
in verse 15, and then the second altar that occurs in verse 15 was Ariel.
Yeah, so in verse 13, it's using the normal word for altar, mitzbeach.
Okay.
But in verse 15, they have this word translated altar, and it's this word haral, mountain of God. And we're going to see it here in the one that's translated later is Ariel, as you pointed out. Now,
Right.
they're sort of related words, but it's very strange. I mean, in verse 15.
Yeah,
So,
the English was very inexact on this one.
yeah, I mean, well, it's translating three different words as the word altar, and you wouldn't have known that. So the measures of the altar is this. It says after the cubit, a cubit and a handbreadth. It talks about the border, the edge, and so forth. The settle, the base, right? And then it says the altar shall be 4 cubits. From the altar and upward shall be 4 horns. Right? So you have these 2 different words for altar here being used. But the altar and upward would be the top part of the altar where the horns are.
Right.
So very strange. And then it says the altar, and that's that same word, Ariel, in verse 16, shall be 12 cubits long, 12 broad, square in the 4 squares thereof. So 144 square cubits would be the, looking at it from the top down. And of course we can mark that into feet. Here, I'm just gonna get up my calculator.
All right.
So we could count it in feet, we could count it in inches, but in feet it's 21 times 21, which is 441. And that's an inversion of 114 Stephen was talking about. So if you take it as 12 times, we'll just square it here, right? That's going to be 144 square feet or square cubits. But if I do it in square feet, because it's 21 feet by 21 feet, that's going to be 441. So they're an inversion of each other. And so these types of inversions of numbers, which happen in Genesis 1:1, to me are very profound. That we can take these measurements and we can do this would be design from Palmoni, right? The wonderful number, or the number of secrets. And so this altar then is representing the 144,000 with this chiastic structure of these measurements. And so what's the significance of the altar in the context of Ezekiel? What's the altar representing?
Well, it's the place of sacrifice. So now it's as the place of sacrifice. How do we apply it?
Okay, well, it's the place of sacrifice. So how does that relate to our line, to who Ezekiel is, and to who we are? Yeah, and this one here has it all in feet, but
Well, okay, I'm having a problem with your math.
having a problem what?
I'm having a problem with your math.
Okay, my math.
Okay, 43:16. You were trying to push this as feet. I'm looking at this and it says the altar shall be 12 cubits long. So if we're accepting this as being the royal cubit,
21 inches.
correct. So what you would have is 12 multiplied by 21.
To get the inches.
Correct.
So 12 times 21, is 252 inches.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which would mean that we have the fractal here of the 2520.
Right. Which we had noted this earlier. Yeah.
Correct. So now if we take this into square inches, we come up with 63,504.
Yeah.
Now,
Which is interesting in and of itself, the numbers there.
now if we were going to divide that and make that into square feet, we would divide that by 144.
Yes, you would divide it by 144 because that's, no, we don't. We have to do something different. What was the problem with that? Because I did this math myself and then I realized I made a mistake. Okay, hang on. Let me go back here. No, that's not right. So we go 663, which is a symbolic number, and 504, which is also a symbolic number. And we divide it by 144 square inches. Yeah, and then we get 441.
Right.
And so that's 441 square feet for the surface of the brazen altar if you're looking down from above, right?
Right.
And it's 144 square cubits.
Right. That's correct.
Okay. And so what's the problem with the math?
Well, when you were doing that earlier, we were not looking at the 252 by 252
Inches.
Correct.
Instead of looking at it as the feet or cubits.
Correct. The
Okay.
whole point, the point that was jumping into my mind was if we're going to have the 2520 square,
Yeah.
then here the altar is being shown as being an experience because the 2520 is an experience for us.
Yeah.
So we have the 2520 in width and we have the 2520 in breadth.
Yeah,
And it's lifted up by 231. Because as we address, the height thereof would be 231
inches,
cubits.
231 inches.
Okay,
Yeah. Now the thing is, we aren't told how high the horns are. But if
right?
you had to guess how high the horns are, how high do you think they would be?
I would figure at least 1 cubit.
Yeah, which is how many inches? 21.
21,
And you add that to 231, what do you get?
252 again.
Right. So I think it's sort of implied that the horns are 1 cubit, though I haven't been able to see how tall they are.
Interesting.
But I would assume that they're a cubit. You know, not little tiny horns. So just, I mean, there's obviously lots that we can look at here because we've looked at this altar and its measurements, and we can see there's a lot of symbolism in the proportions. And we could spend a lot of time just going through figuring out surface areas, breaking them down into different ratios. But I think it's pretty obvious here what we see is that the altar it's about the 144,000. And it's about the people who have a message of the 2520. And it's the 4 2520s too, because you got the 4 sides that are each 252 inches. But even that number 63504, 63 is half of 1260, or 126, I mean. And 504 is doubled of 252.
Right.
And just that you get that number, it's not evident that you should get a number like that just because you've squared a number like 252. If you understand what I mean. I mean, you can square all kinds of numbers and you're not going to get numbers that relate to that number, right? So you could look at it as 63 is 1/4 of 252, and 504 is double of 252. So just the relationships of these doublings and these all these numbers that relate to the 2520, relate to this message, relate to the 144,000. And we've seen this over and over again with the time prophecies, the measurements of time. And so when it comes back to that adding year to year, I just want to go back to Isaiah 29 again.
Oh,
And- Yeah.
Theodore?
Yeah.
Could that 504, could it also symbolize the 5th day of the 4th month, which is the beginning of Ezekiel's vision?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the 504 years, because 504 years from 34 AD to 538, which is 2 times 252, I think does relate to the 5th day of the 4th month. And we've seen that with other periods of time as well. And the 63 relates to Pentecost, the 6th day of the 3rd month, right? Which we often don't think about.
Interesting point.
So we have a lot of these numbers that we can just convert into dates, which are part of Samuel Snow's letters, part of the Millerite line, part of the line dealing with the journey from Jerusalem or Babylon to Jerusalem by Ezra, that all these numbers come together in the altar here when we take these cubits and put it into inches and feet, and even when we look at cubits themselves. So I don't think we can just dismiss this altar, the significance of this altar in relationship to this message. And of course, you know, the number 12 is the number of the covenant as well. So it's not just a number. It's a number that we have in this movement. And then we have the height, you know, the different heights. We have the 3 cubits and then the 4 cubits and then another 4 cubits. So from the first bottom part, it's 7 cubits. So you have all these relationships of the, you know, we could probably even look at the surface area of the whole altar and find all these relationships because they're all based on these numbers that are divisors of a 252 and 126 and so forth. So the settle shall be 14 cubits long and 14 cubits broad. And so you have in verse 17, this 14 is just a doubling of 7. And of course, we see 14 in the story of Jacob, 7 and 7. We see it in the story of Joseph, 7 and 7. We see it in the Israelites coming out of Egypt, the 7 years to possess the land, the 7 years to have rest from their enemies. We can see it in these different representations of time where we have, based on the story of Joseph, taking the 7 years and applying it to the time of Christ. The one is times 252. So even just the idea of 14 for these cubits, one book I was reading, this guy would even cut the line in half. So he was dividing up the altar into sections and then looking at the significance of the numbers there. So because he looks at the altar as, he doesn't use this word, but basically it's a chiasm, it's symmetrical. And so it has these representations there that we would have to a chiasm. And in verse 18, and he said unto me, Son of man, thus saith the Lord God, these are the ordinances of the altar in the day when they shall make it to offer burnt offerings thereon and to sprinkle blood thereon. So what is this day that is referred to? If we're looking at Ezekiel's altar as a representation, what is this day when they shall make it to offer burnt offerings thereon and to sprinkle blood thereon? The day that they shall make it, what is that talking about?
When you're talking about the day, is that not the day of the Lord?
So that's the way I'm taking this, because if we're dealing with Ezekiel's altar, there's going to be a day in which it's made. And what is the day that Ezekiel's been pointing forward to in his book?
A day of reckoning.
And we would call it the Sunday law.
Okay.
Right? Wouldn't we call it that? At least as it relates to our message.
Right.
Because that's what our message has always been about. This movement has always been about the Sunday law. That's what Daniel 11:40-45 is telling us about. It's always been focused on the Sunday law. The line that leads up to it, which we are a part of, that is giving a message to prepare Seventh-day Adventists for the Sunday law. So in verse 19, he shall also give to the priests and the Levites that be of the seed of Zadok, right? So we had looked at this, and Zadok is a group of priests that ended up serving in the temple. They're the ones who actually do the offerings. So you have other priests, but other priests aren't participating in the offerings themselves. That's what we came to understand. Anybody have any other thoughts on that seeds of Zadok? So who would be the seed of Zadok? Because we talk about the priests and the Levites, and then we talk about the seeds of Zadok. Now, we did mention this before, and what was our conclusion? Who's the seed of Zadok? Which approach unto me to minister unto me. And we looked back at Leviticus 16. So that might give us a hint.
High priest.
Okay, so the high priest will come from the seed of Zadok. But it's not just the high priest. There are any priest that is offering an animal is going to be from the seed of Zadok. And so in the context of this movement, we haven't really addressed this too much. But is there a group within the priests that would be of the seed of Zadok? Because Zadok means, as we looked before, it means just. And so we looked back at Leviticus 26, and Leviticus 26 was talking about the Lord's goat and the scapegoat, two classes of worshipers. If we look at this movement now, is there a separation between the priests?
Yes.
Right. And that would be the true priests and the false priests. So the seed of Zadok are the true priests. Those are the ones that are going to approach unto God, to minister unto God. And they have an offering that is given for a sin offering, a young bullock. Right? And it says, they shall take the blood thereof and put it on the four horns of it, and on the four corners of the settle, and upon the border round about. Thus shalt thou cleanse and purge it. So what is this altar that needs to be cleansed? By the seed of Zadok.
I'm looking at it simplistically and asking if it's not a physical representation of the warnings of 2520.
Okay, yeah, which is this movement, right? Because that's what this movement is about. Does this movement have to be cleansed?
Yes.
And is there a right way to cleanse it and a wrong way to cleanse it?
I would think that the right way would be allowing God to do the cleansing, and the wrong way would be to allowing man to do it.
Okay, which would be true. But when we look at the way that man does it, how is that different what God does to cleansing? What does man do to cleanse?
He looks to the external rather than the internal.
Right, and then he starts removing people.
Right.
Right, so you get all of the bad people out, and that's how you cleanse it. And that's how they think you cleanse the camp. But what is God asking us to do?
To rely on him.
And to cleanse our own hearts.
Right.
Rend our hearts and not our garments.
Right.
Right.
Because if we are not cleansed, we can't cleanse the camp anyway. And I would think that the people who are trying to cleanse the camp, what is they're not cleansed, they're not clean. And this is not me trying to judge anybody, but just based upon the actions, it's counterproductive to what God has been trying to do. And I would place that all of those who have rejected the message of July 18th would be what I would call part of the new movement, even if they differ in their beliefs, because they're doing the same work. And that work is destructive to the message. And this message, in order for this message, this altar represents this movement and the message of this movement. But the message is always connected to the people, because you can't have a message without a people to give that message.
Right.
And so in order to give that message, this altar has to be cleansed. And it's cleansed by a group within the movement called the seed of Zadok, which would just be the true priest, the just, not the false priests. And then it says in verse 21, thou shalt take the bullock also of the sin offering, and he shall burn it in the appointed place. So what does this appointed place make us think of? If we're dealing with time prophecies, it's the appointed place of the house without the sanctuary. What is this
Appointed
referring
time.
to? What's that?
Appointed time.
Appointed time. Now it's without the sanctuary. So what does that mean? Is it internal or external?
External.
So this is talking about an external event that should be at an appointed place or an appointed time. Right, now it says an appointed place of the house. The house is what? If we're looking at the house and the temple, what is this temple representing in Ezekiel? Is it representing, what's that?
The house of the ancients?
Well, it's representing time prophecies.
Okay.
It's representing time. So if you say an appointed place of the house, that is a certain work in which Christ is doing, that's when this bullock is going to be offered.
Okay, So if we looked at a cross-reference on this,
Yeah.
would we not be looking at Exodus 29:14?
Okay, so yeah, without the camp. So burning the bullock, his skin and his dung shall thou burn with fire without the camp. It is a sin offering.
Okay.
Yeah. So how are you going to relate this now? Whoops.
Well, what I'm doing is I was recalling that because there's a certain portion of the bullock that was to be put on the altar and the rest of it was to be burned outside the camp or outside the sanctuary.
Right.
Now, the other cross reference on that verse would be Hebrews 13:11.
Okay. So for the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. So this brings up an interesting point. There's a lot in the book of Hebrews that we don't understand, that has been misunderstood because we don't understand the Old Testament well. But in the book of Hebrews, we already have had Paul talk about the holy and the most holy place. And, in Hebrews chapter 9, he goes through and describes the sanctuary, the holy place, the most holy place. He talks about the time in which they're in and about Christ coming, and he's going to cleanse the heavenly sanctuary because he's going to say in, where is it? Verse 23 of Hebrews 9, it was therefore necessary that the patterns of the things in the heaven should be purified with these, talking about blood and earthly sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ is not entered into the holy place made with hands, or the sanctuary made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. If you look at Hebrews and what Paul's talking about, he's talking about a progression of work of the high priest in the heavenly sanctuary. And the work that Christ is doing in the heavenly sanctuary is connected with the work on earth. And it's connected with time, right? Because we have Daniel that deals with time in relationship to the cleansing of the sanctuary. So we know that this work that's being talked about is all about this time. And that's why Paul talks about this time in Hebrews chapter 10 about the tarrying, that we're not going to set aside our confidence because the just shall live by faith, right? We need patience. After that, we have done the will of God, that ye might receive the promise. So, and then when you go to chapter 13, and he talks about this work, and you look at it here, you read this this whole chapter at the end of Hebrews, the last chapter. Verse 8, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. And then he says in verse 10, we have an altar whereof they have no right to eat, which serve the tabernacle. So what is this altar and what is this eating referring to?
Well, the eating was supposed to be done strictly by the priests.
Right.
So
But in the context of this altar, if we go back to Ezekiel and we talk about this altar, what is the altar that we said? What did we say it was?
the 25:20.
Right. It's a message of the 25:20. And what about the eating of the little book? What is that?
Partaking of a message.
Right. It's a message in relation to time.
Right.
So who is it that is going to understand the time?
The wise priests.
The wise priests. No one else understands the time, right? Because they're going to be giving this message of time. They have to develop and understand this message. So when we go back to Ezekiel to try to finish off this altar, we're going to see that time is going to be a part of this. So he's going to talk about this offering of this bullock. And it says, and on the second day, thou shalt offer a kid of the goats without blemish for a sin offering, and they shall cleanse the altar as they did it with the bullock. So you have the bullock, and now you're going to have this kid of the goats. So what is the kid of the goats? Specifically, if we're going to deal with it as a sin offering that cleanses the altar here, what could we relate it to? We got the bullock, we have the kid of the goats, we have a ram and a young bullock, right? So you can have all these offerings. If we go back to the Day of Atonement and you have the Lord's goat, what are these offerings representing?
The false and the true.
Yeah. And so we know that, we look at the offerings, they represent Christ, his sacrifice for us. The part that is hard for people to take is that these offerings also represent God's people at the end of time. And why do they do that? Why can the Lord's goat represent God's people, the 144,000 at the end of time?
I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, well, it's because they have Christ's
The
character,
Lord,
Okay.
right?
the Lord's goat was, sorry,
Lord's
the
goat
Lord's
what?
goat. I was saying the Lord's goat was slain and the 144,000 don't see death.
Okay, so the Lord's goat, the Lord's goat is slain. The 144,000 don't see death. That's correct. But are they slain in the same way that Christ was slain? The 144,000, aren't they an offering?
Yes, that's what I've been chatting about.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because they say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Okay, but let's put it this way. Just like Christ, Christ was offered in the middle of the 70 weeks, but there was a lamb that escaped from the hand of the priest.
Right.
So do the wise priests at the end, are they represented by that lamb?
I think so. I think it's just like what happened with Isaac when he's being offered. If it was not for God's intervention, they would die.
Okay.
Right? But the same cry that goes from their lips, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Goes from their lips just as it did from Christ. But Christ died. Of course, God didn't die, just the humanity of Christ died. But because Christ died, the 144,000 will not taste death, right? Because Christ has tasted it for them.
Right.
And there's two classes of those that are saved, those that have died and those that do not see death. And there's a reason for that, related all the way back to what Christ has done right from the beginning, that you need to have this group that is going to not taste death because they have the character of Christ. The only reason they don't die, because if they had any sin, right, the Lord's goat has no sins confessed upon it. Now it is slain and offered as a burnt offering to cleanse the sanctuary. But it's a cleansing offering. It has no sins confessed upon it. So it's not dying because there's sins upon it. And it represents Christ in that sense, because Christ has no sin. But Christ also does have sin placed upon him and symbolized in other offerings. So the work that happens at the end of the world is the completed work of Christ in his people, where this group of people is going to represent Christ's character. So they're not going to die. But it's only because Christ has died for them. I know it's not explained very well, but hopefully it's understood. Okay, and I just want to get through this last part, even though we're a bit over time. verse 24, and thou shalt offer them before the Lord, and the priest shall cast salt upon them, which is a preservative, and they shall offer them up for a burnt offering unto the Lord. It's a preservative, and also it gives a taste to the meat, right? 7 days shalt thou prepare every goat for a sin offering. They shall also prepare a young bullock and a ram out of the flock without blemish. 7 days shall they purge the altar and purify it, and they shall consecrate themselves. And when these days are expired, it shall be that upon the 8th day and so forward, the priest shall make your burnt offerings upon the altar and your peace offerings, and I will accept you, saith the Lord God. So what are these 7 days, and what is the 8th day?
We see this in the first feast, and we see this in the last feast that God had ordained.
Okay. And can you explain a bit more detail?
Well, the first feast, which we've called the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah. 7 days.
Okay, but you also had an 8th day, which was the Passover. Right.
Well, the Passover would be the first day. Yeah, but that would be right. So the Passover is the first day, and then there's 7 days.
Okay.
Following it.
But on the Feast of Trumpets, are there not 8 days set aside for the Feast of not trumpets, tabernacles?
Oh,
Sorry.
tabernacles you're talking about. Yes. So tabernacles, there's 7 days and 8.
Right.
Yeah. And we see this in Solomon's dedication of the temple, these periods of 7 days, 2 periods of 7 days, which parallels 2 periods of 7 years. It represents a chiasm. And it says, 7 days shalt thou prepare every day a goat for sin offering. So they're doing this 7 days in a row. And 7 days shall they purge the altar and purify it. And so I'm not 100% certain whether these are 2 periods of 7 days or that they're just the same 7 days. I haven't figured that out. But it says, I think they're maybe the same 7 days, just in reading of it. But when these are expired, it shall be that upon the 8th day. So that's after the 7 days are completed, you have this 8th day. And we know that the resurrection happens on the 8th day, right? The first day of the week. And so it's a symbol. The 8 is the symbol of the resurrection. You also have, the 7,000 years of history to the end of the millennium. But after the millennium, that would begin the 8th day. Correct? If we were to look at it in thousands of years, of course, that doesn't have time attached to it anymore. So, obviously there's more that we could get from this, but just in closing this up, you can see that this work of the altar is about this message, and it's about time. It's about a consecration. It's about sacrifice. And it points and connects us back to the beginning of the sanctuary. It points us to the prophecies of Isaiah dealing with Ariel, which is a powerful symbol dealing with the city of God or the mountain of God. And where's the mountain of God in our message?
July 18th,
Well, Daniel 11.
40 to 45.
Yeah.
Glorious Holy Mountain.
Yeah, the glorious holy mountain, right? So we can connect all these symbols and in multiple ways. But we can see that this message of Ezekiel, even though it's talking about symbols that we could apply in the future, definitely these are symbols that are applying right now to this movement. And so there is going to be this work that is accomplished in this movement that is a work of consecration, right? And the 7 days represent also the consecration of the priests, which we had at the beginning of Ezekiel. And now we have these 7 days at the end of Ezekiel dealing with the altar. And if you're going to compare the two, the the priests and the altar, how are they comparable, or how do they relate to each other? How does this 7 days of the consecration of the priest that we saw there at the beginning of Ezekiel now relate to the 7 days of the consecration of the altar here at the end of Ezekiel? Is it talking about the same thing in just a different symbol?
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean the priest offers on the altar, but
Right.
but it's talking about the same thing, and we have applied that to the period of time in which we're in right now. We're in the period of time from July 18th, well, actually, really from November 9th to December 25th, 2021. That is a period of consecration of the priest. It represents that 7 days. And that's the time that we're in right now. And I'm not predicting time right now. Like, I'm not saying, when things are going to happen, but I would say that in order for our message to be complete, for us to have done the work that's needed to give the message, we at least symbolically have 777 days from November 9th.
Right.
And so I would say it's probably not till after December 25th, 2021, that we're going to see our message empowered in some way. But I'm not trying to say that I know that for certain. It could happen before. But this period of time anyway as a symbol is at least a symbol of that consecration. So I'm not going to try to predict time, just because we know we can't do that. But we can know the time that we're in, and we can measure it. We are to measure the time. We're going to add year to year. And when we do that, after the time has passed, we can look at it and we can understand it. So Stephen put on here, one level of the altar is 24.5 feet long, another 28. If we add these together, it's 52.5. So we get that 525 again, which is from July 18th to December 25th, 2021, the 525. Okay, any final thoughts before we close with prayer? We'll probably touch on some questions that arise on this chapter next week, or not next week, tomorrow. But I want to try to see if we can get through chapter 44. Probably we won't. But dealing with the prince, the gate for the prince, we at least should get through the first part of it. So any final thoughts? Okay, well, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for the time we've had to study. And we ask, Lord, that you can be with us throughout this day, guide and direct us in all that we do to glorify you. Be with us in our study tomorrow as well. Help us to prepare for that. And we know, Lord, this week ahead, there's so many things for the rest of this week. I'm at least thankful for the cancellation of Christmas to some degree. I don't know if everyone else is, but I'm thankful for the time that you give us to study. At least here in Alberta, we have no Christmas, and it's going to give people time to think, hopefully, and to study, especially people who are looking for light and truth. And so we just ask, Lord, that you can continue to lead and guide in our studies through your Holy Spirit. Be with each person, watch over them, and keep them safe. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.